The first light of dawn crept across Port Moresby's airfield, illuminating what should not have existed. Captain Paul Irvin Gunn stood motionless beside the modified B-25 Mitchell, his oil-stained hands gripping a wrench he no longer remembered picking up. The bomber sat on the tarmac like a predator interrupted mid-hunt, ugly, asymmetrical, and radiating barely contained violence. 8 50-caliber machine guns protruded from where the bombardier's transparent nose should have been. Each barrel was 12 inches longer than standard, carefully harmonized to converge at 200 yards, the optimal range for shredding a ship's superstructure. The glass nose cone that once housed a bombardier and his Norden bombsight had been replaced with solid metal, welded in place with seams that would make any factory inspector recoil in horror. 2 additional guns jutted from cheek blisters, mounted on either side of the forward fuselage, their muzzles extending beyond the propeller arc. 4 more guns bristled from the top turret, now locked in the forward position and wired to fire with the pilot's trigger. The entire aircraft had been transformed from a precision bombing platform into something fundamentally different. A low-altitude gunship designed to fly at masthead height and annihilate anything in front of it. No engineering diagram approved this configuration. No technical order authorized these modifications. No general in Brisbane had signed a requisition form. The aircraft existed in a bureaucratic gray zone, tolerated because it worked, illegal because it violated every regulation in the Army Air Force's manual. Gunn had built it anyway. He had stripped the bombardier station himself, fabricated the gun mounts in a makeshift machine shop, test-fired the harmonization at a range he'd constructed from sandbags and scrap metal. He had calculated the center of gravity by hand, adjusted the tail trim to compensate for the additional weight, and personally test-flown each iteration until the aircraft handled the way he needed it to. The result was magnificent and terrible. 14 forward-firing machine guns that could unleash over 11,000 rounds per minute. Enough firepower to reduce a destroyer's bridge to scrap metal in 10 seconds. Enough destructive potential to change the mathematics of naval warfare in the Pacific. It could also earn him a court-martial. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. General George Kenney had given Gunn broad authority to modify aircraft as needed for combat effectiveness. But this exceeded any reasonable interpretation of that authority. This was a complete redesign of a medium bomber, undertaken without North American Aviation's approval, without engineering review, without safety testing beyond Gunn's own nerve and the laws of physics. If the modification failed in combat, if the added weight caused structural failure, if the recoil forces shattered the airframe, Gunn would be responsible. Officers had been court-martialed for less, but if it worked, Gunn's jaw tightened as he stared at the bomber. Somewhere 300 miles north, Japanese convoys steamed toward New Guinea every week, carrying reinforcements, supplies, and ammunition. High-altitude bombing had proven useless. B-17s were hitting less than 1% of their targets. Meanwhile, Allied soldiers died in the jungle, outnumbered and outgunned, while fresh enemy troops poured ashore from ships that conventional bombers could not sink. And somewhere far beyond those convoys, in a converted university in Manila, his wife and 4 children were starving in a prison camp. The bomber before him was his answer to all of it. Gunn tossed the wrench into his toolbox and turned toward the operations tent. In 3 days, his illegal creation would face its first real test in the Bismarck Sea. Either it would revolutionize warfare, or it would kill him. Possibly both. December 8th, 1941. Nichols Field, Manila. Paul Gunn heard the bombers before he saw them, a distant mechanical hum that grew into a roar that seemed to split the sky. He looked up from the Philippine Airlines maintenance log just as the first wave of Japanese aircraft appeared over the city, their formations precise and unopposed. The bombs fell in perfect sequence. Nichols Field erupted in geysers of fire and debris. Parked aircraft, P-40 Warhawks, B-17 Flying Fortresses, civilian transports, exploded where they sat. Fuel dumps ignited, sending black columns of smoke into the tropical morning. Within minutes, American air power in the Philippines was being systematically erased. Gunn's hands went numb. His family was 15 miles away in Manila. Polly, Paul Jr., Nathan, Connie, Julie. The house on Dewey Boulevard, where his daughters had played just that morning, where his wife had kissed him goodbye, without knowing it might be the last time. The Japanese were coming, and he could not reach them. The next 3 weeks dissolved into chaos. Gunn flew reconnaissance missions over Japanese landing sites, dodged Zero fighters with nothing but a transport pilot's reflexes, survived being shot down in the jungle, and walked out with shrapnel still embedded in his leg. He volunteered for every dangerous mission, hoping each flight would somehow bring him closer to Manila, closer to his family. It never did. On Christmas Eve, Major General Louis Brereton called him into a smoke-filled operations room. "We're evacuating key personnel to Australia. You're on the list, Captain. Be at the airfield at 400. Gunn's throat tightened. "My family." "Cannot be reached." Brereton's voice carried the weight of 100 impossible decisions. "Manila is surrounded. The Japanese will have the city within days. Then I need to stay." "You need to follow orders." Brereton's eyes softened slightly. "Your family will be treated as civilians. The Japanese have obligations under international law." They both knew what that meant. They both knew those obligations meant nothing. Gunn flew to Australia because orders were orders, because staying meant capture, because one more body in a prison camp would not save his wife and children. The flight south felt like desertion. February 23rd, 1942. Santo Tomas Internment Camp, Manila. The notification reached Gunn in a terse Red Cross telegram. Gunn, Clara Louise and 4 children interned. Santo Tomas University, Manila, stop alive. Stop, no further information available. Stop, something inside him stopped working properly. He read the telegram 17 times, searching for information that wasn't there. Were they fed? Were they together? Were the children injured? The telegram said, alive, but didn't define what that meant. Breathing, suffering, starving. Every night he lay awake calculating. Santo Tomas held 3,000 prisoners. Japanese rations were inadequate. Disease would spread. His daughters were young, too young. His sons might be forced into labor. Polly would try to protect them all, and the Japanese would punish her for it. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He could not think about anything except the 1,500 miles separating him from the people who mattered more than his own life. The only solution was simple and impossible. End the war faster. July 1942. Brisbane, Australia. Major General George C. Kenny arrived in theatre and found a catastrophe. His predecessor had been relieved. Morale was shattered. The Japanese controlled New Guinea and were bombing Australian cities. High-altitude bombing was achieving nothing. B-17s couldn't hit moving ships, and the Japanese resupply convoys sailed with impunity. Kenny was 53, a World War I ace known for unconventional thinking. Within weeks he'd purged Deadwood from command and started asking dangerous questions. Why are we bombing from 20,000 feet when we can't hit anything? Why are our bombers defenseless at low altitude? Then someone mentioned Captain Paul Gunn, a former enlisted pilot who was modifying A-20 bombers without authorization, mounting guns in places that violated every technical manual. Kenny found Gunn in a Townsville maintenance hangar at 2 a.m., covered in grease, installing a fourth machine gun into an A-20's nose. The modifications were crude but brilliant, practical solutions to real combat problems, designed by someone who understood both aircraft and desperation. "Captain, these modifications are unauthorized." Gunn didn't look up from his work. "Yes, sir." "They violate Army Air Force's regulations." "Yes, sir." Kenny watched him tighten a mounting bolt with meticulous precision. "How many can you convert by next week?" Gunn's hands stopped. He looked up, meeting Kenny's eyes. "All of them, sir." Kenny smiled. "Then you're my new Special Projects Officer. Modify every A-20 in theater. After that, start on the B-25s. Do whatever you need to do. I'll handle the paperwork." For the first time since Christmas Eve, Gunn felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. August 1942, Townsville, Australia. Gunn attacked the A-20 Havoc with a cutting torch and a mechanic's intuition honed over 20 years. The transparent bombardier's nose came off first, 300 pounds of plexiglass and framing that served no purpose at 50 feet altitude. He replaced it with sheet metal and 4 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, all firing forward, all controlled by the pilot's trigger. The guns were scavenged from wrecked P-40 fighters, their mounts fabricated from steel plate in a machine shop that smelled of acetylene and desperation. The first test flight nearly killed him. The added weight shifted the center of gravity forward, making the aircraft nose-heavy and prone to diving. Gunn compensated by adding ballast to the tail and adjusting the elevator trim until the A-20 handled like it was supposed to. Responsive, stable, lethal. On September 12th, modified A-20s struck a Japanese airfield at Buna. Gunn flew lead aircraft, coming in at treetop level with all 4 guns blazing. Japanese anti-aircraft crews, accustomed to high-altitude bombers they could track for minutes, had less than 10 seconds to react. Most died before they reached their weapons. The Strafer A-20s destroyed 43 aircraft on the ground and proved that low-altitude gunship tactics could revolutionize air warfare. Kenny's response was immediate. Now do it to the B-25s. Make them bigger. October 1942, Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea. The B-25. Mitchell was a different beast entirely, larger, heavier, and far more complex than the A-20. Gunn studied the aircraft like a surgeon planning an operation, identifying what could be removed, what could be added, and where the structural limits were. He started with 4 forward-firing 50-caliber guns in the solid nose, then 6, then 8, each weapon adding weight, recoil stress, and ammunition capacity that had to be calculated precisely, or the aircraft would tear itself apart. The top turret presented another opportunity. Normally, it rotated to provide defensive fire. Gunn locked it in the forward position and wired it to the pilot's trigger, adding 4 more guns to the aircraft's frontal firepower. 14 50-caliber machine guns, all firing simultaneously, capable of unleashing 11,200 rounds per minute. But raw firepower meant nothing if the bullets went everywhere. Gunn spent weeks harmonizing each gun, adjusting the angle of each barrel so all 14 converged at exactly 200 yards. He built a firing range from sandbags and metal panels, test-firing thousands of rounds until the impact pattern was tight enough to shred a ship's bridge in seconds. The center of gravity calculations consumed his nights. Too much weight forward, and the aircraft would be uncontrollable. Too much aft, and it would stall. Gunn worked the math by hand, double-checking every figure, because the first crew to fly his creation would be trusting their lives to his arithmetic. He test-flew each modification himself. If it was going to kill someone, it would be him. November 1942. Coral Sea, test range. Kenny stood on a patrol boat's deck, binoculars raised, watching guns modified B-25 approach at wave-top height. The bomber came in fast and low, masthead altitude, maybe 50 feet, its engines roaring. At 200 yards, every gun opened fire. The target Hulk, a decommissioned freighter, disintegrated. Machine gun fire chewed through steel plating, shattered portholes, and turned the bridge into confetti. Then the bombs released, skipping across the water like flat stones on a pond, slamming into the hull below the waterline, where armor was weakest. The explosions lifted the freighter's bow out of the water. Kenny lowered his binoculars slowly. "How long is the attack window?" 10 seconds, Gunn's voice crackled over the radio. "Maybe 12 if the ship's moving slow. We come in low enough that their anti-aircraft guns can't depress to hit us. By the time they react, we're already past them. And if they do hit you? Then we have 2 engines and redundant systems. We can take damage and keep flying." Kenny watched the target Hulk settle deeper into the water, listing badly, smoke pouring from a dozen ruptures. A single B-25 had just destroyed a ship in less time than it took to read a damage report. "How many can you convert?" Gunn's response came without hesitation. "As many as you need, sir. As fast as you need them." The Japanese convoy steaming toward New Guinea had no idea what was coming. Neither did the rest of the world. March 2nd, 1943. Rabaul Harbor, New Britain. 8 transport ships and 8 destroyers departed at dawn, carrying 6,900 Japanese reinforcements toward Lae, New Guinea. The convoy commander had explicit orders: deliver the troops, shore up the collapsing garrison, prevent Allied advance. The journey would take 3 days across the Bismarck Sea, a route Japanese convoys had sailed dozens of times with acceptable losses. This time would be different. March 3rd, 1943. 0800 hours, 200 miles northeast of New Guinea. The B-17 flying fortresses came first, dropping from 20,000 feet in standard formation. Their bombs fell in long arcs, easy to track, easier to evade. The convoy scattered, ships zigzagging through their wakes. A few near misses sent geysers of water skyward. No direct hits. The Japanese anti-aircraft crews cheered. The celebration lasted 90 seconds. Iwo 8 115 hours. 13 Beaufighter strike aircraft appeared at wave-top height, skimming the ocean at 300 knots. Their nose-mounted cannons and machine guns opened fire at point-blank range, strafing the convoy's decks in systematic passes. Japanese sailors manning anti-aircraft positions died where they stood, cut down before they could train their weapons. Gun crews collapsed. Officers on bridges dove for cover. Fire control systems shattered. The convoy's defensive fire weakened to scattered, uncoordinated bursts. Then Gunn's B-25 strafers arrived. 0822 hours. 12 modified B-25. Mitchells came in at masthead height, 50 feet above the water, engines screaming, 14 guns per aircraft blazing simultaneously. The sound was apocalyptic. 168 machine guns firing at once, unleashing over 134,000 rounds per minute across the convoy. The lead transport, Kyokusei Maru, disintegrated. Machine gun fire shredded its bridge, radio room, and lifeboat stations. Personnel on deck were scythed down in waves. Steel plating peeled away like paper. Then the skip bombs released. 500-pound weapons tumbling across the water at 250 miles per hour, skipping once, twice, slamming into the hull below the waterline. The explosions tore through the engine room. Kyokusei Maru shuddered, listed violently to port, and began sinking. 11 more B-25s followed in textbook sequence, each selecting a target. Each unleashing the same devastating combination. 10 seconds of concentrated machine gun fire to suppress defenses, followed by skip bombs that punched through hulls like sledgehammers through plywood. Ayo Maru, hit amidships, broken in half, sinking in 4 minutes. Teyo Maru, bridge obliterated, dead in the water, secondary explosions tearing through cargo holds. Shinai Maru, skip bomb detonated in the boiler room, superheated steam killing everyone below decks. The destroyers tried to intervene, maneuvering to shield the transports. It made no difference. The B-25s were too fast, too low, too devastating. Destroyer Shirayuki took a skip bomb to the stern that severed its rudder and flooded the aft magazine. Tokitsukaze burned from bridge to waterline, its ammunition cooking off in continuous explosions. March 4th, 1943. Final tally. All 8 transports sunk, 4 destroyers destroyed. Japanese killed, 2,190 soldiers, 750 sailors. Survivors floating in debris fields, hunted by Allied PT boats and strafed by returning aircraft. Allied losses, 5 aircraft, 13 crew members. March 5th, 1943. Port Moresby. Gunn stood in the operations tent, staring at reconnaissance photographs of the Bismarck Sea. The ocean was empty, no ships, no convoy, no survivors, just oil slicks and debris fields stretching for miles. Kenny entered holding a decoded Japanese radio intercept. Their high command is calling it a catastrophe. They're evacuating Leh by submarine now. No more daylight convoys, ever. Gunn said nothing. He was calculating. 8 transports meant 6,900 troops who would never reach New Guinea. Troops who couldn't reinforce Japanese positions. Positions that would collapse faster. Collapse that would push the front lines north, toward the Philippines, toward Manila, toward Santo Tomas, toward his family. "You just changed the war, Captain," Kenny said quietly. Gunn looked at the photographs again, at the evidence of 3,000 men drowning in the Pacific. Young men, conscripted men, men with families of their own. The carnage was overwhelming, the mathematics brutal, the strategic implications undeniable. He felt no satisfaction, only the cold arithmetic of survival. "How many more convoys are heading south, sir?" Kenny's expression shifted, recognition, perhaps, of what Gunn had become. "We'll find them," Kenny said. "All of them." Gunn nodded once and returned to the maintenance hangar. There were more bombers to modify. April 1943. North American Aviation Factory, Kansas City. News of the Bismarck Sea Massacre reached California and Kansas within days. North American Aviation's engineers studied Gunn's field modifications with a mixture of horror and admiration. He had violated every structural specification, ignored load limits, and created something that should not have worked. It had annihilated an entire convoy. The factory-built B-25G emerged 3 months later with a 75mm cannon mounted in the nose. Gunn's concept, refined by engineers with slide rules and wind tunnels. The B-25H followed with even heavier armament, 14 machine guns and a cannon, all firing forward, exactly as Gunn had envisioned in a maintenance hangar 2 years earlier. His field modifications had become official doctrine. Gunn kept innovating. He designed auxiliary fuel tanks to extend the B-25's range by 500 miles. He developed rocket launching systems, improved skip bombing release mechanisms, and personally tested every modification by flying combat missions. He was technically too old and too senior to fly. He flew them anyway. Every ship sunk was a day closer to Manila. December 26, 1944. Mindoro, Philippines. The white phosphorus shell detonated 30 feet from Gunn's B-25 during a ground attack mission. Burning fragments tore through the cockpit, embedding in his left arm and shoulder. The pain was immediate and absolute. White phosphorus burned at 5,000 degrees, consuming flesh, bone, and nerve tissue. Gunn landed the aircraft one-handed, transferred control to his co-pilot, and collapsed on the tarmac. Medics cut away his flight suit, revealing burns so severe that amputation seemed inevitable. 3 surgeries, and 2 months later, he kept the arm. Barely. His combat flying career ended that day. He was 55 years old and had flown over 300 combat missions, more than most pilots half his age. The Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, and Legion of Merit sat in a drawer somewhere. He had never cared about medals. February 3rd, 1945. Santo Tomas Internment Camp, Manila. The U.S. 1st Cavalry Division smashed through the gates at 2100 hours. 3 years and 11 days after the Japanese had locked the gates, American soldiers poured into Santo Tomas, firing into the air, shouting liberation. Gunn arrived 8 hours later in a commandeered jeep, his burned arm still in a sling. He pushed through crowds of emaciated prisoners, scanning faces hollowed by starvation, searching for features he had memorized 3 years ago. Polly saw him first. She was 45 pounds lighter, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes sunken. She whispered his name, barely audible, and collapsed into his arms. Paul Jr. was 19 now, skeletal, eyes too old for his age. Nathan was 17, silent. Connie and Julie clung to their mother, staring at the stranger who was their father. They had survived. Barely, but they had survived. Gunn held his family and felt something he had not permitted himself to feel in 3 years. Relief, not triumph, not satisfaction. Just the overwhelming, crushing relief that they were alive. 1945, 1957. Manila and beyond. Gunn stayed in the Philippines, rebuilding Philippine Airlines from rubble and broken aircraft. The airline he had managed before the war was gone. Aircraft destroyed, facilities bombed, records burned. He rebuilt it anyway, the same way he had rebuilt bombers, through sheer determination and refusal to accept failure. He flew commercially for 12 more years, content to be a pilot again rather than a weapons designer. His family healed slowly. Some wounds never closed completely. October 11th, 1957. Approaching Manila in a storm. Captain Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn was flying a Philippine Airlines DC-3 through a typhoon when the aircraft lost power. He was 68 years old, still flying, still fixing problems, still refusing to stay grounded. The DC-3 went down in the mountains north of Manila. There were no survivors. Legacy. The U.S. Air Force buried him with full military honors. The official citations mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his Silver Star, his 300 combat missions. They did not mention the unauthorized modifications, the regulations he violated, or the court-martial he narrowly avoided. But pilots knew. Engineers knew. Every AC-130 gunship, every A-10 Warthog, every close air support doctrine traced its lineage to a maintenance hangar in Port Moresby, where a grieving father had transformed bombers into ship killers. Gunn had not invented the concept of overwhelming forward firepower. He had not discovered skip bombing, but he had combined them with desperate ingenuity and personal fury, creating a weapon system that changed naval warfare permanently. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea remained the most decisive air-sea engagement of the Pacific War. Japan never again attempted a major daylight convoy. Their armies starved in the jungle, while American forces advanced north, island by island, toward Tokyo. Gunn's illegal bomber had helped end the war, and ending the war had brought his family home. That was all he ever wanted.